Thank you for listening to Agile Standup, the show where we talk about all things related to Agile, Scrum, and Kanban, leaving no subject professional, unprofessional, awesome, insensitive, or otherwise untouched. Today, I'm going to speak with Bas Vodde, co-creator of LeSS, Large Scale Scrum, and we're going to discuss the origins of the framework, what it is, and why it will work for your organization. All right, so I'm sitting here with Bas Vodde here in Santa Clara, California. Bas, thank you so much for coming down all the way from here. There you go. Hey. Hey, and I guess the first question that I have, and I think that the audience is going to want to know this, is where did the idea of large-scale Scrum come from? Where did it start? What are kind of the origins around that?
Okay, there never was an idea of large-scale Scrum or creating a scaling framework. That was never my intention, and it was never a goal in my life, at least. And instead, me and Craig Larman, the co-creator of LeSS, one of the things we enjoy is building products. And we are involved in building products and coaching, development, technical coaching, working with teams, working with organizations. And we started working together in, what is it now? Let me think, 2018 now. So about 15 years ago, when I worked in Nokia, and I was leading the Agile change in Nokia networks, not the phone side, the network side. And we invited Craig over as an external coach, whereas I worked as an internal coach, to do Agile. They didn't really know what it meant yet. And so we did a lot of introductions to Agile development. Craig mostly did a lot of introductions, and that were received really well. Then we went to the different products and we asked them, what do you want to do? And most of the products said, well, this extreme programming thing, that's too extreme for us. We don't want to do that. But this Scrum thing sounds easy. So we started working also with Ken Schwaber, the co-creator of Scrum, and got him in, got much more familiar with Scrum than we were before. We started working with different products, but all of the products that we worked with had more than one team. And Scrum was described as only a one-team framework. So, and the second problem we had was there were lots of products who all wanted to try out Scrum at the same time, and Craig and me were the only coach that were available to do that. So in order to do that, what we did is we would go to a product, we would do some pairing up with the developers to discover the reality of the actual development. We would meet up with an cross-section, cross-slice of the organization, and we would discuss the problems that they had, what they wanted to do, and we would come up with an experiment. Together we would try something, and we would go to the next product while they were trying that, do the same thing, pair up with the developers, talk with the people, create an experiment, go to the next product, etc. And over a 2-year period, we basically only did that. Experimented lots of different things with multiple teams trying to figure out how to use Scrum. And a lot of that eventually ended up in LeSS. The phrase LeSS didn't exist at that point. We just called this Large Scrum. And that was it. We didn't want to make anything out of it. In fact, we wrote 2 books in 2010 and 2008 or something like that. They're catalogs of the experiments that we did, where they just described, we worked in this particular context, we had this problem, we tried this and it worked for us. Maybe it will work for you too. To just, give lots of ideas to organizations. And we never really wanted it to become more like that. But then one of the things that triggered us at some point to make it into a framework was first the lots of interest in it. Second, organizations not knowing where to start because there were too much experiments. And third, other scaling suggestions that we strongly disagreed with. Let me keep it polite for now. And
I'll ask about that later. So
yeah. So we decided, do we want to keep doing what we do now, and that is work on products and do coaching, or do we want to package what we've done at least in a little bit more convenient form, label it, brand it, etc. And we decided it's probably best for the world to package it and make it available so that there's at least an alternative available to things that we consider not very good. And then, one time we first just called it LSS. And then one time I dropped the name, hey, we can call it LeSS. And that was kind of sticky and people liked that. So we decided, oh gosh, now I guess it's called LeSS.
It's a great marketing thing too. And with LeSS, it's actually true. I mean, you spoke about it yourself that it's focused on simplicity and it's customer centric and focused on the product, not the project. Going back to your experimentation thing though, that's really cool. And I really haven't heard anybody, at least in any framework, talk about experimentation. So did the genesis of experimentation come through interpretation from some other agile activity, or was it experimentation because you felt that you need to just throw things out and try it and see what happened?
That's a good question, and I don't really know.
That's a good answer.
I do know that Craig and me, and I don't know why. Maybe I don't know if that was before we worked together or because we worked together, but we by default think in iterative ways. And that's partly why we're attracted to agile development and Scrum, etc. So whatever we do, it tends to be iterative. So for example, at some point, we worked with a company to make a video about LeSS, and they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, we don't really know. Give us something and we'll give you feedback. They said, no, you can't do that. You need to tell us exactly what you're going to do. And we're like, I don't know. That's not what we do, right? Roughly the idea is this. You guys make lots of videos. Try something. We'll give you feedback and we'll then work on the next version. And it frustrated them and us in that particular relationship. And I've discovered, and I don't know when that happened, but I discovered that the default way for me to work is to try things, get feedback from it, and iterate over that. So whenever we were in this situation where there were lots of products wanting to do Scrum when they had multiple teams, we simply didn't know. So we would go to the organization and we said, we don't know either. And that's okay. Let's explore, what you've been doing, what worked of that, what didn't work of it, and let's try out something and see if that works. And it's not randomly trying things out. A lot of those were based on our experience, reading. We did a lot of reading of descriptions of large and successful products. I'm a huge reader. I have a huge library of stuff, collect old material in computer science and things like that. So we have a lot of origins for these experiments, but it's kind of a natural thing to do for me and Craig, and I don't know why or where that came from.
That's great. So I guess could I ask, how long did it take from an experimentation standpoint in order to get to this is what we think at least the rules are? Or how many iterations?
Roughly. No idea.
No idea. No, no problem.
So
no problem.
what happened is we never wanted to make rules. We think rules is a really bad idea.
Yeah, they're so constraining.
They are, and they're kind of anti-experimentation. So we never really wanted to make rules. So what happened was we did a lot of experiments. We ended up writing 2 books with catalogs of experiments. And most of the feedback of that was pretty positive. But one of the consistent feedback is, thank you very much. Now we have lots of ideas and we don't know what to do. Because never did you say you must do this or you should start with this. And that feedback happened so often that at some point we said, okay, is there something more prescriptive that we should say where people, which is, these are the most important things. These are the things that you must do, or these are the things that you should start with. And again, we didn't want that, but people couldn't start, wouldn't experiment either. So therefore we had to create something. Craig and me sat down and we wrote, out of all the things we tried out, what are the things that are essential, that have the biggest impact from our perspective. And we started writing the rules. We, as always, had lots of arguments about that, which is why I have no idea how many iterations we did. It's just, he would say, that needs to be removed. And I would say, no, that is essential. And we would argue about it and eventually come to some agreement.
So it sounds like that the rules were something that you did because people needed more of a direction in order to understand the framework. Is that an accurate statement?
It is, and it was for us an exercise to, of all of the things we did, to ask, which ones were the essential ones, which ones were the most impactful ones. Right now we could have changed the experiments to essential structure or essential experiments and secondary experiments. But partly in the trend of Scrum, like Scrum always had rules. Like one of the part that pre-Scrum guide that always influenced us most was the second Scrum book from Ken Schwaber, Agile Project Management with Scrum. And the best part of that book was Appendix A. It's kind of sad.
because the rest of it was just, it was like, the best part was already, first.
No, the rest were stories. And Appendix A suddenly said rules.
Ooh.
And it was 3 pages or so, and it says, these are the things that you must do when you start using Scrum. And in Scrum, we always found that very useful. It kind of separated the useful practices from its essence. Now that appendix eventually merged or changed to what we now call the Scrum Guide. So we have had always this idea of rules being useful as long as they are small and minimum and essential. And the rules of Scrum influenced us to, should we do the same for multiple team Scrum? Now, the rules of LeSS are very different because the rules of Scrum are truly the rules of a framework, whereas LeSS is, like Craig likes to say, it's an organizational design. It's not a framework. So it talks about how you need to structure your organization rather than what events you need to have, because the events and those kind of things are basically taken from Scrum. So the rules are very different, but the exercise for us to kind of get the essence out of the experiments that we did, I think was a very useful exercise. And they're still evolving. Like LeSS doesn't create different versions, but if you look at the rules, there is a change log, and it will show you like every single word that has changed in the rules and why. And one of the most fascinating things about that is some of the LeSS trainers started analyzing that, and they discovered the most common word in the changelog is removed, which is like, we want to make it simpler. So we want to remove things rather than adding more things to it.
Interesting. So I did notice that, and I thought that was pretty cool. In the version that I saw, the title, I believe, of the document was less rules. And then in the same size text, same size or same font, everything, in parentheses, it said April of 2018. Now we're sitting here and it's November 2018, but that was really cool to me because you were very open about, hey, this is the last time it was changed. So I haven't seen the changelog yet myself, but I will check that out. But the version that I saw, it had that date prominently stated. And to me, that was more of a comfortable thing, especially coming from an Agile background, in that, hey, this thing is always changing. And here, I'm telling you when it was last updated because, hey, you know what? It's not April anymore, and maybe things are a little bit different. And maybe something's coming up next. So really cool on that. Moving on to the next question that I do have. What is the difference at a high level? And I'm not sure if everybody in the audience knows this, but there is two versions of LeSS. There's LeSS, which I've heard you refer to as less basic, and then there's less huge.
Yeah.
What are the high level differences between the two?
Okay. The basic difference is that less or basic less is from 2 to 8 teams, and less huge is an, if you wish, extension to that basic less for when you start working with more than 8 teams. Now, historically, it is caused by this. So originally, in the first couple of teams we started experimenting with, they would be 2, 3, 4, 5 team products. And we started figuring out how to work with those 5 team products. And we've gotten pretty comfortable with them. But what happened is that as we proceeded, the products that we worked with started growing larger. And they became 10, 20, 50, 100 team products. And we started noticing that after around 8 or so, what we had done for 3 team products didn't work very well anymore for 15 team products. And mostly because the product backlog became really hard to have an overview of for that one product owner. So, because at this point in time, there was no less yet, there were just experiments. So we created new experiments to explain how we coped with that by dividing the product into different customer-centric views or perspectives, and basically managing one view of the product in almost as a separate product with a separate, what is called an area. And that worked pretty well. And we were pretty happy with the results. But then something terrible happened, which is the people started reading these experiments and they started applying these ideas into products with only 3 teams, in which those are completely unnecessary and they just create additional structure that you don't need. So once we were creating the rules, and this is actually already when we wrote our first book, when we created, at that time they were called Framework 1 and Framework 2, because we're not very good in naming yet.
Right.
And
you need a marketing department for that.
Yeah. We never got to that. But there we made the difference between the 2 frameworks already in order to avoid the techniques for large products to be applied in a context that they shouldn't be applied, which is small products. So by separating the frameworks, it explicitly said areas, area product owner, area backlogs, great techniques when you have a product of at least 8 teams or more. If not, don't apply those techniques because you're unnecessarily creating more complexity within your product, and that will be harmful.
One thing that I want to level set on for the audience is that the thing just about less, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Bas, but you have 8 teams for less basic, up to 8 teams, between 2 to 8, I believe you said, and then 8 plus for less huge. Now, just because those are separate teams does not indicate separate products within the team or separate work streams. It's really one product. So all teams are servicing one product. So from a customer standpoint, they do not realize all of the teams or all of the effort that goes into it. They just see the one product. Is that right?
Yes.
So
there's still, even in less huge, there's always still one product backlog, one product owner.
Now that's awesome. So and that's a really great concept that I hope a lot of larger products, at least that I've seen, can definitely get behind. At the sprint review, just out of curiosity, I know we're kind of going off a little bit into a little bit of a end, but at the sprint review, that's one product being demonstrated. Who would typically demonstrate the product? Is it, do we have? Because typically, and again, this is how I've done it. At the sprint review, I would have the developers come up and show their work, and then get that feedback. Or we could have a representative from the business demonstrate the working software to get that feedback. How does it work in a LeSS sprint review? Is it the same, or is it different at all?
I'll answer it in a basic LeSS framework, not in the less huge framework. So in basic LeSS, you have one sprint review. One of the most common ways of doing that is called a sprint review bazaar.
Oh.
And in the sprint review bazaar, we have one large room with each team in the corner having a version of the product where they are going to show the features that they worked on during that sprint. Then stakeholders and users come into the room. They visit the different teams. One way, kind of like you just described, is for the teams to create a scenario where then the user would run through this scenario and then give feedback on how it was for them, what they'd like to see different, etc. And then the users can join multiple of the teams. The teams and users together create feedback, write down different feedback, and then often a sprint review bazaar ends up with a centralized part where everybody gets together and they're asked for the major feedback from the different stakeholders or the different teams. And that then gets discussed within a larger group and then changes the direction of the product.
So the way that you describe it, it sounds amazing. First of all, I did not expect the word bazaar to come out. It sounds kind of like a trade show atmosphere where people are, walking around from table to table and they're, seeing the products that they've created and then getting that feedback. So does that mean that I know you explained it with the less basic, but is it exponential when it goes to less huge, where it's like you would have a room full of teams and they'd be demonstrating the product and getting the feedback?
You could do that,
okay.
But most of the time in less huge, you have different areas, and the different areas do the sprint review independent of each other.
Oh.
Especially if the areas, which is not uncommon, are related to specific users or specific functionality for specific users, then that will help a lot because they all have a different view of the product. And therefore, combining them into one large sprint review, which is also possible, but it's just not that useful.
Interesting. And then just to kind of go back on, because you did the real quick rundown of one product owner, one product, and then, it could be from 2 teams to 100 or more. There is just one product owner.
Yes.
And that one product owner has that one vision. So that product owner then, and I'm kind of paraphrasing a lot, but in the less huge model, the one product owner can then translate into many area product owners. So my question is do those area product owners convey the message of the product owner? For example, do they, in an organizational structure, do they report to them? Or does each individual area product owner, which they are a subset of the actual one product owner, do they have their own understanding of the product, and then they drive their own individual requirement area? Which one is it? Is it I'm conveying the message for the product owner and I'm helping drive that particular area? Or I know what the product owner wants, here's how I would drive it, or here's what we need in order to get to what the PO wants?
Both, depending a little bit on the context.
Oh.
But let me add some clarification to what you just all mentioned, because there was a lot of content. So in less huge, we divide it in areas. Each areas is at least 4 teams. You should never have areas that are smaller than 4 teams. But preferably, you keep the areas relatively large. The areas look at one customer-centric view of the product. Now, depending on the product, the area will have a relatively independent vision, or it is more the conveying of the overall vision of the product owner. I would say it depends a lot on the type of product, and therefore it's always a mixture of them, but how much is conveying the message of the product owner's vision of the product and how much is an area having their independent vision will depend on the product.
Awesome answer. Thank you so much, and thank you for the clarification. I appreciate that.
Next.
I know, next. One thing that you say often, at least I've heard it recently, you often say that less will not work for your company. Now, that's a strong statement. I guess my question is, what do you mean by that? And is there a right type of company to encourage them to experiment with? Is there a right formula, or what's the thing?
Not really. I don't often say it myself.
Oh.
And you need to paraphrase the entire quote, which is, less will not work for your company, at least not the way it is now.
Oh, yes, I forgot that part. Yeah, you're right.
It's kind of essential.
It is essential, because I think what I just said was that less doesn't work, period. But the way that you say it, it's less works, but it won't work for your company as it stands right now. So yes. You're right. That is I apologize.
So that's okay. What it means is that less influences directly the structure of your company. Right? It's not a process or purely a process framework, but it's a design of your organization. So when you adopt less to an organization and you keep the organization as it is and you expect no changes, it will not work, which is less doesn't work to your organization.
Interesting.
At least not as it is now, because usually one of the first things you'll do in a less adoption is adopt some organizational changes. The most common ones are the removal of functional departments such as QA or BA, and instead create a true cross-functional organization, and the removal of teams organized around the architecture, which we refer to as component teams, and instead create teams that are able to pick up end customer features and do all of the work needed to have the feature in the system within the same team. So those changes are almost always structural changes within an organization, and they tend to happen very quickly after your less adoption. Without those changes, it's probably not going to work.
Very cool. No, I like that a lot. And again, thank you for that clarification there. That is very important to say that it will work, of course, if you'd make changes. Now, you mentioned that one of the requirements of correct application of LeSS was to follow the LeSS rules. And I know we talked about that earlier. If there is not something mentioned explicitly in those rules, can the team then experiment, or the organization then experiment with customizing the framework to what works for them or the product? Is that appropriate? I'm thinking more of like thinking out of the box and being creative. So I don't necessarily have any examples off the bat, but I do know that you mentioned that there are a lot of rules in the less rules section that are about rules about adopting the rules. So when it comes down to, sometimes people can analyze things, especially a business analyst can come in and say, oh, well, they don't say this, they don't say that. Does that then give us room? Was that intentional at all? Or is it like the rules are very explicit, you must follow them in order for this to work?
Both yes and no.
Okay.
So the rules are very minimum because we don't want to force people to follow rules. And we want to have freedom for people to have ownership to how they work. So therefore the rules purposely only consist what we consider the essence. right? In early days of agile development, one phrase that unfortunately seems to be lost now, that was commonly used, was the phrase barely sufficient methodology. So barely sufficient methodology means that you need to give rules that are just enough or even just too little, because that will put people on the, sometimes that at that time was called the edge of chaos, where they will need to learn and inspect and adapt within their environment. And that's basically what the less rules try to do on a larger scale. Now, the rules are there for a reason, and they're not there for customizing. However, one of the things that I often like to share, which I shared with you yesterday, that I find kind of a funny idea, is what I call the LeSS paradox. And the LeSS paradox means that part of LeSS is the experimental mindset of trying things out. Without doing experiments, you're not doing LeSS. Right? That's the basis, the essence of LeSS.
That's a great quote.
But also, LeSS is about following the rules. You must follow the LeSS rules. Otherwise, you're not using LeSS. But experimentation is about breaking the rules.
I'm conflicted.
But you shouldn't break the LeSS rules, of course.
Right, okay.
Right? So we call that the LeSS paradox. It basically means you can never adopt LeSS.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. It is a paradox. So that's,
but the way out of that is just that recognition that you should, if you truly understand why a certain rule is there, and you understand why within your particular context that rule might not apply, then of course at that point breaking the rule is the right thing to do. Most of the time people break rules because the change in their organization is too hard. That is not a reason for breaking the rules. That means you just need to try to change your organization instead.
Ooh, I like that. But see, sometimes that call to action can be a little too steep for organizations. And I don't know. I guess I could see that not working, right? I mean, we've seen that. No?
What?
Oh, have we seen looking at the rules, and if the rules don't work, what you said was that if they don't work, don't break them, change the organization to make the rules work.
Sure,
that can be a tall order.
Not really, because LeSS adoption is not a black and white thing. Right? And part of that is that no organization should ever have the goal of adopting LeSS. Right? Every organization needs to have the goal of building a product. Right? And you should never confuse the way with the actual goal. So therefore, LeSS is about improving the organization. And therefore, if you are where you are now, and you take the LeSS rules and you work towards that, whether or not you're fully following all of the LeSS rules, doesn't matter that much. What matters is that you're improving, that you're understanding, and that they guide you that direction. And this is especially the difference between relatively small LeSS, the 50-ish people, and the less huge adoptions. Whereas in smallish LeSS, you will be able to make the changes basically at once and go and then focus on the product. But within a really large organization, with hundreds of people, you don't want to do that all at once. So therefore, the organization is always in the state of working towards following the rules. You don't change the rules. It's something you continuously work towards.
Awesome. Moving on to a more, I guess it can be an interesting subject to discuss. There's a lot of different frameworks out there, and one of them is SAFe. And I've noticed personally that SAFe is very much a I guess easily adopted is the way to say it. There's a lot of people out there and a lot of companies out there that say they're agile and then they go safe. Not personally commenting that safe is wrong or less is better or anything like that. But I was just wondering how is, and it could be at any level you want to discuss, but how is less different from safe? Right now, it's a pretty popular framework. I've heard about it a lot. There's a few companies that I personally am aware of that are going that direction. So what are the differences, or I don't know. What are your thoughts?
It's about the opposite.
It is the exact opposite of less.
I consider them to be near exact opposites. Yes.
Huh. Okay.
Where safe is kind of not very much as a framework. It is a process in the same trend that we had unified process before. In fact, the amount of similarity between unified process and safe is quite large.
That's RUP, right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
And not accidental, since there's the same people involved in creating both of them.
Oh, okay.
But less is true to the origins of Scrum, the origins of Agile development, of creating this bare minimum, of creating more and more ownership towards the team, of moving away from the heavy weight, of avoiding processes, of avoiding roles within organizations. And one of the, something we talked about today, one of the essences of less is this very simple idea that you want to create flexible, agile organizations. But in order to do that, you need to have simple organizations. Right? Complex organizations are slow organizations. They are not flexible. And therefore, a lot of less is about creating more simplicity. And whenever I look at SAFe, and yes, they say you don't have to do all of that, and there's the essential variant, which is still 10 times as complex as less. They tend to add so much complexity to organizations. And personally, I think that is the exact opposite of agile development and of the origins of agile development. And definitely the exact opposite philosophy of less.
Interesting. So is it fair to say that it's not that safe is bad or less is better or vice versa? It's that depending on the company, safe may work for you. And to go to your comment earlier, I think you touched on it a little bit, but I really liked it. It was safe is great. In fact, hold on, let me go into my notes real quick so everybody can hear my handy dandy notes. And I wrote it down, but I believe what you said, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I really like this. In fact, as soon as I wrote this on some sticky notes, I took a picture of it and sent it to all of my friends. But safe asks, how can we do what the organization does now in an agile way? Whereas less asks, why did we do it this way in the first place? And can we do it better in a simpler way?
Yes.
That is awesome. In fact, I have to be honest, I don't know. I am not an expert in either framework. Hoping to be soon. Of course, I'm going to be doing my studying. But to me, that's like the best intro way to really. I feel like if I would have heard that first coming into this class, and then of course going into, I'm sure I'm going to go and take a look at SAFe. I think that's a really great way to kind of frame the two, because one's not better than the other. They just have different intents. No,
I wouldn't.
I was trying to dress it up and make it. All right,
yeah,
sounds good.
It sounds politically correct and
yes,
nice,
it does.
But no, I would never apply SAFe in any organization I would ever work with.
I tried, boss. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
I really did.
At least not if you want to have an agile organization, because the doing what the organization does now in an agile way leads to the same as the organization does now. So if you want to keep doing exactly the same as you was doing with agile terminology, then SAFe is probably for you, and I will find another place to work.
No, I hear that. So I'm Okay, like you touched on a little bit of history there, and that's not the first time I heard that. But the same people who invented RUP were from IBM. That they also then invented, or not invented, but they also then designed SAFe. So I'm wondering why. And we don't have to discuss it here, or really figure it out here. But I'm assuming that the adoption, because I've heard that SAFe is a lot more easily adopted by organizations. I feel like that the adoption is more because it's out of the box. It's super confined. It's just like you said, it's a process. Less is the more creative way with a focus on the teams, and it's customer centric, which can take away some power from larger organizations. So is that fair to say that that's maybe some of the possible pushback that you can get, whereas SAFe wins out over less depending on the organization, because SAFe is set, it's confined, and it really does everything that the organization wanted it to, or wants to continue doing, whereas less is, let's do it different.
If you want to use the phrase agile,
okay,
and you want to keep doing exactly the same as you did before, SAFe is perfect.
I like that. Okay.
If you actually want to change into an agile organization, you don't have to do less, but SAFe is definitely the wrong way forward.
Awesome. And on that, thank you for playing along with us today on the Agile Standup. Today, I spoke with Bas Vodde, co-creator of LeSS, Large Scale Scrum, where we discussed its origins, what is LeSS, and why it won't work for your organization, or it will work for your...
Why do you need to talk so fast?
Sorry, I know, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I'm trying to make it cool. It's low budget. That's what it is.
So fast is cool.
Fast is cool, man.
Okay.
But fast, that's even cooler. See, I gotta learn to say my A's differently. I like that. Fast, boss,
As if boss is English.
Well, that's what you said. I'm just going off what you said.
Yeah, but it's not English. It's a Dutch name.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah, but you're saying it like, I don't know. Never mind. All right, whatever. It's late. Okay. So on that, just real quick, Bas Vodde is the co-creator of 3 books with Craig Larman. The first title is Scaling Lean and Agile Development. Second one is Practices for Scaling Lean and Agile Development. And of course, Large Scale Scrum, which is part of the Mike Cohen series of books, all available now wherever books are sold. And I always like to end our podcast pod with, do we have any impediments? So I'm assuming we don't have any impediments. We're good to go, right?
I have no beer.
No beer. We need to get beer. You're right. We should have done this with a little bit of fuel, right?
Yeah.
It would have been right. Would have gotten this party started. All right.
I thought that was the deal, right? I do the talking and you give me the beer.
How about after? We could do it. We could do it
That's
off mic.
No use anymore.
Well, that's true. That's true, because it's just maybe it's well, whatever. Anyway, Bas, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.